Tell it like someone who no longer needs approval, only truth. I was sitting at my own dinner table when my father leaned forward and let his words drip like poison across the plates. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. His voice was calm, sharp, practiced. He said I was useless, that my child and I were nothing but leeches, parasites sucking this family dry. My mother smiled and nodded, slow and approving, as if she had been waiting her entire life for someone to finally say it out loud. The cruelty of it almost made me laugh. They were eating food from my kitchen, sitting inside a house I paid for, surrounded by walls built from years of my exhaustion. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I looked him straight in the eye and said they had 24 hours to leave. The silence that followed felt alive, heavy, pressing against my ears like a warning that something irreversible had just happened. From the outside, my family never looked broken. We were the kind of family neighbors admired. Perfect smiles in holiday photos, loud laughter at cookouts, church every Sunday. My mother baked pies for fundraisers, and everyone called her generous. My father shook hands like a local politician, confident and respected. And my brother Knox was the centerpiece of every story. Every conversation circled back to his brilliance, his vision, his next big idea. He was the golden child, the promise, the future. I was the background, the reliable one, the one expected to quietly fix things when Knox inevitably set them on fire. That dinner didn't happen out of nowhere. It was built slowly, layer by layer, from years of swallowed anger and small humiliations. I remember being a child, standing barefoot on cold kitchen tiles while my mother stirred a pot on the stove. She smelled like cinnamon and detergent. She never yelled, but her looks carried rules. Don't question, don't challenge, don't make things harder. Family comes first, even when family hurts you, especially then. I learned early that love in our house came with conditions, and approval was something you earned by staying silent. By the time I was 16, I understood exactly where I stood. Knox crashed a car, and my father laughed it off, saying, "Boys will be boys." I brought home an A-, and my mother sighed and told me not everyone was meant to shine like Knox. At night, I lay awake staring at glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, wondering if anyone would notice me if I ever stopped giving. I wondered if I mattered beyond what I could sacrifice. 10 years later, everything changed when my son was born. Asher became my anchor, my proof that life could be gentler. Holding him in that hospital room, tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I made a silent promise that he would never feel invisible the way I had. That promise echoed in my chest on the night of the dinner. Asher was upstairs. I knew he could hear the voices. I knew he could feel the tension. And suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what I was teaching him by staying quiet. The house my parents insulted me in was mine. I built it piece by piece through endless nights, back-to-back meetings, proving myself again and again in rooms where I wasn't expected to belong. Every wall carried the weight of my effort. Still, they treated my success like it belonged to everyone but me. The phone calls had trained me for years. Rent emergencies, broken trucks, Knox needing money for another almost there dream. I always said yes, because saying no meant being labeled selfish. Temporary help turned into obligation. Obligation turned into chains. I learned to recognize my mother's voice when she called. Tight, rehearsed, like she had practiced the lines before dialing. My father never asked. He demanded. Knox never called directly. He let them do the work while he chased fantasies. And I kept giving, convincing myself this was just what family did, until giving started costing me parts of myself I couldn't get back. The real breaking point came with a phone call on an ordinary evening. My mother's name lit up my screen as I packed up at work. Her voice trembled in a way I recognized too well. She said my father needed surgery. She said the house was about to be taken. Big fear, big numbers, no details. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, but something in me resisted. I told her we would talk in person, all of us. That night, after my son was asleep, I wrote rules on a scrap of paper and slid it under my plate. No money, no attacks on my child, end the conversation if it turned ugly. I warned my best friend Tessa. She listened quietly and then told me the truth I had been avoiding. They were lying, or at least exaggerating. She told me to record everything, to stop letting them rewrite reality. When my family arrived the next evening, my mother tried nostalgia, laughing about old memories, softening the room. I stopped her. I asked for proof, paperwork, bills, anything. There was none, only trust. Knox launched into another pitch. My father demanded loyalty. My mother dragged my son into it. And then, finally, the truth slipped out. The debt was Knox's, always had been. That was the moment something inside me went cold and clear. And when my mother threatened to go public, to use my child to force my hand, I repeated the words calmly. 24 hours. If you think the worst part of this story was that dinner, you're wrong, because once they walked out, the real damage began. The moment the door closed behind them, the house felt hollow. Not peaceful, hollow, like the walls were holding their breath. I stood in the kitchen staring at the plates they'd barely touched, my hands trembling just enough to notice. I stacked the dishes slowly, listening to porcelain clink against porcelain, each sound sharper than the last. I should have felt relief, but instead grief settled in. Not for them, for the illusion I had spent my entire life protecting. Upstairs, a light was still on in my son's room. I climbed the stairs quietly and found Asher sitting cross-legged on his bed, sketching in a notebook. He didn't look up when I walked in. He just asked if they were gone. I told him yes. He nodded and kept drawing. A rocket ship this time, flames shooting out the back. I kissed the top of his head and told him I had us. The words sounded steadier than I felt. The next morning, my phone buzzed, before my alarm. Then again, and again, notifications stacked on my screen until my chest tightened. It was my mother, on video, crying. Her face framed perfectly, eyes red but controlled, voice shaking just enough to sound believable. She told the internet my daughter had turned her back on family. She said I had abandoned my parents in their darkest hour. She showed photos of my house, of my child. Strangers flooded the comments with judgments. Some praised her courage, others tore me apart. They called me heartless, ungrateful, a monster. My hands shook as I scrolled, stopping only when I saw comments about my son. That boy deserves better. That was the moment fear replaced shock. By noon, the video had hundreds of thousands of views. At work, people avoided eye contact. Whispers followed me down hallways. My manager called me in and asked carefully if everything was okay at home. I smiled and lied, saying it was being handled. Inside, I was burning. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to explain everything. Instead, I did what I had always done. I stayed quiet, until Tessa showed up. She didn't ask questions. She sat across from me at a cafe, laptop already open, and told me to save everything. Screenshots, links, dates. She said this wasn't family drama anymore, it was reputation warfare, and if they wanted to play in public, we would respond with facts, not emotion. That night, I created a folder on my computer and labeled it simply evidence. Every message, every video, every threat. It felt cold, mechanical. It also felt like armor. The calls and texts escalated. My father tried bargaining, promising partial repayment that made no sense. Knox sent long messages accusing me of betrayal, of jealousy, of always trying to sabotage him. My mother posted follow-up videos, her tears drying up, her tone sharpening. She hinted at my personal life. She hinted at my son's broken family. Each post felt like another boundary crossed. I didn't respond. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. 2 days later, the call came. There was a clause in my parents' mortgage I hadn't known about. The house was already in default. Legally, it could be sold to any qualified buyer without their consent. If I wanted to remove leverage from the situation completely, this was my chance. I didn't hesitate. I authorized the purchase, quietly, cleanly. When the papers were signed, something inside me loosened for the first time in years. The reaction was immediate. Knox exploded with rage. My father accused me of theft. My mother doubled down online, playing the victim harder than ever. None of it mattered. The locks were changed, notices were served. For the first time, their chaos had boundaries they couldn't cross. When I walked through that house after the sale, it smelled of dust and regret. In the attic, buried under boxes of forgotten junk, we found something unexpected, a letter from my grandfather. His handwriting was shaky but clear. The money had been meant for my education, not Knox's dreams, not my parents.
The confrontation came unexpectedly. An airport, public, loud, unavoidable. They had just landed when they saw me standing there with my lawyer beside me, papers in hand. Knox shouted first. My mother cried on cue. My father demanded respect. Travelers slowed, phones lifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult them. I told the truth, calmly, clearly. Security watched closely. When they were escorted away, the humiliation they once used against me followed them instead. I sat on a bench afterward, shaking from adrenaline, not regret. The court process moved quickly. The ruling was in my favor. Harassment orders were issued. The truth was on record now, permanent, untouchable. But this story doesn't end with victory, because once the noise fades, you're left alone with what comes next. And what came next forced me to ask myself a question I had avoided my entire life. Who was I without the role they forced on me? The days after the airport felt unreal, like waking up in a life that didn't quite belong to me yet. My phone stayed quiet in a way that made me uneasy. No demands, no emergencies, no carefully rehearsed guilt, just silence. I didn't know what to do with it at first. For years, chaos had been the background noise of my life. Without it, everything felt exposed, raw, honest. My mother posted one final video a week later. This time, there were no tears, no trembling voice. She spoke quickly, defensively, shifting blame onto Knox, explaining how she had been misled, how she had only wanted to protect her family. It should have felt like vindication, but it didn't. Watching her rewrite the story again, just with a different villain, drained whatever hope I had left. When someone uses the world as their stage, apologies stop meaning anything. Knox unraveled publicly. His confidence dissolved into bitterness. He posted long rants about betrayal, about stolen opportunities, about how I had ruined his future. But without my money or my parents' house, there was nothing left to prop him up. Investors disappeared. Followers lost interest. The same people who once praised his vision scrolled past him without a second glance. Watching it happen didn't bring me joy, it brought clarity. This was never about dreams, it was about entitlement. My father vanished from the conversation entirely. No calls, no messages, no confrontation. He faded out quietly, the way people do when authority finally fails them. For years, his voice had been the loudest in every room. Now, there was nothing. That silence said more than any apology ever could. The legal process wrapped up faster than I expected. The judge ruled clearly in my favor. The harassment order was granted. The evidence spoke louder than emotion ever had. Financial restitution wasn't possible. The money had been gone for years. But the ruling mattered. The truth was no longer something I had to defend. It existed independently of me now, recorded and permanent. I sold the house they had lost, not out of spite, out of closure. I walked through it one last time before handing over the keys. Every room held a memory I didn't want to carry anymore. The attic was empty now, the letter from my grandfather safely stored away. I locked the door and didn't look back. At home, life slowly softened. Asher laughed more. The tension that used to creep into every dinner disappeared. Friday nights turned into taco nights again. Homework spread across the kitchen table. Music played while we cooked. Ordinary moments felt extraordinary because they were finally peaceful. I realized how much of my parenting energy had been spent shielding him from adult problems that were never ours to carry. One afternoon, Asher asked if we could plant a tree in the backyard. He said he wanted something that would grow with us. We went to the nursery and picked a small pecan tree. The soil was hard and dry when we dug the hole, sweat running down our backs in the Texas sun. When we finished, he stood back proudly, convinced it would sprout overnight. I told him trees take time. He nodded, serious, like he understood more than he said. I said yes when a journalist reached out, not because I wanted revenge, because I was tired of silence protecting the wrong people. I told the story honestly, without exaggeration, without drama. The article went live quietly. Then the messages started coming. Women, men, parents, children, people who had been scapegoated, used, guilted into submission, people who thought they were alone. They thanked me for putting words to something they had never been able to explain. For the first time, my pain felt useful. Tessa came over one evening with iced tea and a look on her face that meant she was about to challenge me. She said I had turned survival into strength, that I could help others navigate what I had lived through. Advocacy, education, support. The idea scared me, but it also felt right, like something was finally aligning instead of pulling me apart. That night, I tucked Asher into bed and found a drawing under his pillow, a rocket ship, larger than the others, blasting through stars towards somewhere unknown. I kissed his forehead and told him he was free to dream, that no one would ever take that from him. I meant it with every part of myself. Later, alone on the porch, I watched the yard in the quiet dark. The pecan tree stood small but steady. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained, about how family can wound you deeper than strangers ever could, about how boundaries feel cruel to the people who benefit from you having none. I understood something then that had taken me decades to learn. Choosing yourself doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. Love without respect isn't love, it's control dressed up as loyalty. And peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you protect. The story people tell about you will never be fully in your control, but the life you build can be. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next crisis. I was standing in the quiet aftermath of one I had survived. But survival isn't the end of the story, because what comes after survival is rebuilding, and that final chapter is the one that matters most. Rebuilding didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, quiet moments that didn't look impressive from the outside. Morning coffee without anxiety tightening my chest. Evenings where my phone stayed silent. Decisions made without running them through anyone else's approval first. I learned how unfamiliar peace can feel when you've lived your entire life in survival mode. At first, my body stayed tense, waiting for the next crisis. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing exploded. No one demanded, no one threatened, no one guilted me into submission. Asher changed too. The guarded way he used to watch adults slowly faded. He talked more, asked bigger questions, laughed louder. One night at dinner, he told me he wanted to be an engineer so he could build rockets that never ran out of fuel. I told him that sounded perfect, and for the first time, I believed the future could be something we looked forward to, instead of bracing for. The pecan tree grew inch by inch. Leaves appeared, then shade. It became our marker of time. Each season, it reminded me that growth doesn't need chaos to be real. Strength doesn't have to be loud.
Stability doesn't need permission. I still get messages from people who found the article, strangers who recognized themselves in the story. Some are angry, some are scared, some aren't ready to walk away yet. I never tell them what to do. I only tell them what I learned, that love shouldn't cost your dignity, that family isn't defined by blood alone, that boundaries are not punishments, they are protections. I don't hate my parents. I don't hate my brother. Hate would mean they still had space inside me. They don't. What they left behind was a lesson, not a wound I carry anymore. Accountability changed everything. Not for them, for me. If you're listening to this and wondering whether choosing yourself makes you selfish, let me be clear. Staying silent to keep the peace only teaches others that your pain is acceptable. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally succeeded at protecting what matters. I used to believe being strong meant enduring everything quietly. Now I know real strength is knowing when to leave the table, when to say no, when to stop funding other people's destruction with your own well-being. This story isn't about revenge, it's about freedom. It's about the moment you realize you're allowed to rewrite the role you were assigned. You're allowed to stop being the fixer, the scapegoat, the silent supporter. You're allowed to build a life that doesn't revolve around someone else's chaos. If this story felt familiar, you're not broken, you're not alone, and you're not wrong for wanting peace. Thank you for listening. If this helped you see your own situation more clearly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about breaking cycles, choosing yourself, and rebuilding stronger, make sure you subscribe. Sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that set us free.